Welcome to The Brave Journey Within with Jim and Jenn. This show is about the spiritual journey and all of the challenges, healing, wisdom, and consciousness expansion experienced along the way.
Welcome back to Brave Journey Within with Jim and Jenn. And today's topic is going to be reincarnation and perhaps some other things, Jenn.
Yeah, I'm so looking forward to this conversation because when I first started opening up to my spirituality, the first question I had was, do we only have one life? Is there such a thing as a past life? And I was fascinated by that conversation. And I know, Jim, you also do regression work. So I'd love to hear your take on the idea of past life and how did you get into the idea of it and what's your experience?
Well, I was thinking about it. The first, when I'm going to give a shout out to a guy named Dr. Drew Leader at Loyola University, um, which is a Jesuit university. And one of the first classes that I can remember is him uh, sort of stating that reincarnation was a fact,
Oh, wow, that's amazing.
auth- authoritatively. And I'm like, well, I'm like a practicing Catholic at the time, and it's a pretty bold statement to make, man.
What did he say to back it up? What were his thoughts about that?
He, if I remember correctly, he shared some of the work of Dr. Ian Stevenson from University of Virginia School of Medicine. So he is a psychologist who did a lot of research. I think he recorded it was either like 2,500 to like 3,000 cases of reincarnation. And so I started like reading these cases where, a child would remember a past life or remember being murdered, and like call out the person by name. So like remembering factual details about a life that they could not have known about,
Right.
or speaking a language that there's just no way that a young child would speak a foreign language in a certain dialect, like a kid in Italy speaking Chinese or something like that.
That is so fascinating.
And then the way that Dr. Stevenson recorded it, there would be photos too. So, right, a lot of times we'll talk about traumas in past lives, but there would be physical characteristics in the body. So, someone I remember like was shot with a shotgun, and on their chest, this newborn had this scar, right? Like this red demarcation that literally looked like the shotgun blast. And then they would go back and, maybe find photos of the person that they claimed to be that had been murdered. And it would be almost identical, right? So you have this physical manifestation of this imprint of this trauma from this fatal thing. So he backed it up with that kind of stuff. And if you're being honest with yourself and you look at some of these things, you really have to do some mental gymnastics to really dismiss them.
Yeah, I totally agree. I know when I first started on my healing journey, I went to a therapist who did past life regression, which is why I love that you do past life regression because it was such a healing moment for me to see my immediate past life. Not, time is not what we think it is, and supposedly it's all happening around the same time. Like it's all interlayered and connected, but we perceive it as a past life. So I'm just going to talk about it that way, but it was just so healing to know what I went through in that life, and it was really traumatic, and it was similar to how this life started. And I got to see, my mom in this life and we went to the karmic board. We got something approved. I was not allowed to see what the plan was, but the idea that we set up this lifetime that we're in and all previous lifetimes to have an experience and that the soul carries on. And it's almost like we're signing up for a course or something, hey, you know what? I think that's going to solve all the things I need, the credits I need for this, that, and the other. And I'm going to learn these lessons. And that's exactly what I need for my degree over here. That's like what it was. And it was fascinating to me and to see the karma that was being played out, and how my mom's karma and my karma interlinked, and how we're helping each other clear things in this lifetime. And it's so fascinating to me. And at the time, I also read some different books on reincarnation and the idea of past lives. And the people who've been regressed say very similar things, no matter what their spiritual background. And to me, that was also proof. So going into regression, and with regression work, I have my own personal experiences with what I've been through. But for you, like, what is it like as a practitioner and working with people,
It
and
is.
people that you've trained with? So anybody that you've worked with who's done it, what do they say?
There's always that curiosity. When I first learned how to do hypnotherapy, I guess you could say I already believed in reincarnation, but I'd never done a past life regression. So it was almost like, is this actually real? Is this going to work? Because my training was more like inner child work, so regressing to deal with any trauma in this life, and then almost as like an amusement, it was like, all right, let me do one, and I did it, and it blew me away. And so there's like that excitement where you're like, when I got done with my regression, I was like, I got right on Google and I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, this doesn't make any sense, right? Like, trying to like disprove it in a way. Um, but then also tying it into, okay, why did my consciousness show me that particular life? Like, what was the lesson in that is relevant to what is happening now? Because this moment, that's really the moment that matters, right? Um, as a practitioner, it is probably the most interesting work that I do, in that I have no idea what's going to happen. Like, people get put in different, what's the TV show? It's really popular, Outlander or something like that.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
I mean, it's kind of like that, right? You get dropped in. So, however your therapist goes through the regression, like eventually you land, and then you start to make sense of it. And I'm simply guiding you through that process, but you're the one that's describing everything to me, like, and it's very fascinating what people, I mean, stories are compelling. And when you have no idea, it's exciting because you're like, okay, this is a mystery. What is the reason that this is being shown here now? And how can it be of help? Right? Like, what is the highest good of all of this? So the things that come up in those are, I mean, I record them for a reason because like it's easy to forget, but they're really interesting. And I guess the feedback, generally speaking, is almost like bewilderment, like wonderment, like, wow, like I had no idea, like that was an option. So there's always like the um, I know when I learned about reincarnation, I was like, what does that mean? What are the like? Who am I with? Because we get attached to things, right? Like, attached to gender, attached to people in our lives. And then one of the things that I learned in my regression was like the concept of soul pods. Like, you talked about your mom, planning this life together, and like, it's a play, right? Like, I'm going to be this now, and you're going to be that, and
Right.
we're going to have this thing happen. And it's like, that's how that works. It's like, yeah, like, okay. So
Well, it's
realizing that there are other people that you've traveled with on this journey over many, many lifetimes, it's just interesting. It just makes life that much more fun to learn about, I guess.
so yeah, when I first started opening up to all of this years and years ago, it was like the idea that we create some of the difficulties in this lifetime, and why, and what are we learning, and how many lifetimes do we actually have here? What is the big picture? Why are we doing it? And it is such a it's a concept that so many people are against, even because that's what we've been programmed to believe. And And I grew up believing that, there was only one life, but I always had a question about it. Like, I always felt like there was something bigger and that something wasn't making sense. So, I don't know, I love this topic. It's such an interesting thing to think about. Like, who were you in past lives? I remember one time I had a past life memory, and my Reiki master at the time, and everything I was bringing up was like trauma, trauma, because I think I was meant to heal a lot of things in this lifetime. He's like, "Jen, why do you keep bringing up all this trauma? Where's all the good lifetimes?" Like, bring up the fun stuff. And I'm like, isn't that what healing's about? Like, I'm on a mission. I want to get this done. Like, let's move through this stuff. But I'm curious your thoughts about it, being that, you really, that is one of your primary focuses with your clients and helping them heal. You do it through counseling and through that kind of therapy and through the hypnotherapy. I do it in a different kind of way, but I'm just curious, what do you feel is your idea of like the purpose of all of this? Why do we have so many lifetimes? Why do we have memories of the traumatic ones versus the really happy ones where maybe we were a queen or we had lots of money and everything was fine? What is your point of view on that?
It's a really great question. Um, I sort of look at it as, your soul is just wanting to experience things. How do you experience joy without the polarity of what it's like to suffer or to experience loss?
Ah,
So that type of thing. In my regression, um, it was a very violent life, and then in this life, I had the opportunity to join the military after 9/11, and a lot of my friends did, and that was sort of like the way to go at that time. And I chose not to do it. I went into the Peace Corps instead. And so when I went through my regression, it was like shown to me that this was my evolution of putting down the sword and evolving into a more peaceful existence. So, it's just something that I had to learn. So going from sort of like that warrior mentality to, okay, how do you live a more peaceful life? And why would you want to do that? What do you want to accomplish? So that was what I got from mine, um, which made sense, which made
mhm.
sense. So it's like this evolution of not that your soul needs to evolve, but I almost look at Source like this supercomputer that's learning about all aspects of life to better understand everything. Like, you don't only want to experience joy because what would be the fun in that?
Right? I know. Well, it's funny
How would
because
you know that that was joy?
I've had a lot of difficulties in this lifetime, probably because I did not resolve it in my past lifetime, so I had it carried in, which is what it often does. If we don't resolve things, it keeps following us until it gets resolved. And I I just I just remembered thinking like, "Okay, wouldn't it be nice if everything was just really easy from here on out?" And part of me was like, "Oh, but that makes it so much more fun when there's struggle." I'm like, "Okay, I need to clear that belief because I wanna make sure things are nice and chill. I don't mind some challenges, but yeah, I don't need to be making things more difficult than they need to be?" So, I
Yeah.
caught that and I was like, "That's really interesting." So how much do we believe that we need suffering or, like real difficult challenges as opposed to just maybe a more gentle experience where it doesn't need to be so difficult? And, why do we make things more difficult on ourselves? And I know a lot of times that is from past life trauma, and it's almost like when I see it energetically, it's like we're in a groove, and that groove is like a really deep rut, and we're just kind of in it, and we're trying to get out of it, but it's kind of all we know. And so we believe we need to suffer and struggle through that rut and that groove, trying to make it through to get out on the other side. And I think when we have the idea of the hero's journey, are you familiar with that concept, the hero's journey?
Yeah, but maybe you wanna explain it for the audience?
So the hero's journey, it's about, Well, I mean, really, every movie is based on the hero's journey. It's about that process of going into an adventure, thinking something amazing is about to happen, and then things go awry, things are bad, you struggle, it could even be life and death, and you just feel like the world is crazy and you're not going to make it. And then you come around on top, and hopefully you do make it and you come around on top and you've won. And then the idea is then you pass that wisdom on to others. And so that's basically
I
the
think
hero's.
the whole world is on the hero's
Right, I
journey right
know,
now.
I know. So when sometimes when I think to myself that, okay, it's time for some easier times, I just wanna chill. I want things to be nice and easy. I want to flow so easily. And then I think about, well, maybe if I do that, I'm not gonna be on my hero's journey. So it's funny because I think we do need challenges to really grow, but I think a lot of our suffering comes from a misperception of the challenges. And what we're meant to experience as the challenge in each lifetime to help us grow into whatever our soul is aiming for. Um,
So
so I'm
ultimately, I mean, like the philosophy, at least from the Eastern point of view, is the cycle of life. Like you ultimately get to a point of liberation, right? So the cessation of suffering. And so how I try, this is a practice, right? Like this is something that I implement in my own life. When you have struggles and tribulations, it's how can I be grateful for this? Like, what do I
Mhm.
need to learn here? Like, what am I being taught? Like, what does my soul want me to know about this situation? And if you could see it through that lens, it's not so much a struggle. It's almost like a game. Like, okay, this is the challenge that's presenting itself to me, and I need to figure this out.
Right. Yeah, that's a much better question than why is this happening to me?
Well, shit. So shifting from a victim mindset and
Hmm.
mentality to one of love, which we talked about sort of in the last episode of empowering yourself to face these challenges and your fears, and whatever that is, that's confronting you now.
So I know, I work with a lot of people. Sometimes I'll get visions of people's past lifetimes, like I might see them on a horse or, I often see people on horses. I don't know why that is, but sometimes it's been like in the 1800s, sometimes it's before then. Sometimes I'll see them in battle where they've had traumatic experiences in battle. I'll see that too. Um, or just losses, people losing children or someone that they loved and cared about, and how traumatic that was for them. And what I've noticed is we carry it even in this body. So a lot of my work when I do energy healing, I work at moving trauma out of the body, and I can feel that energy, and the person has no memory of what is even coming up. But if I see them, let's say as a war, I just had this the other day. I saw somebody in a battle and it was a pretty traumatic death in battle. And she had no memory of that. But when I mentioned it, her body, I could feel the pain coming out of her body. And she had a very emotional response to it at the same time, but she had no memory of it. So she didn't even go through past life regression where she was able to re-perceive what happened. She just had it locked in as a part of her being, and it was being expressed through the body. So I find all of that so interesting. Um, have you like experienced anything like, I know you do more, with the mental health side of things, but have you ever noticed anything along those lines?
You'll find certain themes with people. Typically different challenges in life. Sometimes it's past traumas that are not conscious. Sometimes different aspects related to money.
Mhm.
So for example, if you were a monk and took a vow of poverty, right, and you saw money as, in a certain way, like carrying that with you into this life where you might have financial issues now. So like those types of things, different things, all kinds of things related to different facets of life. Being like a single parent or struggling, phobias,
Mm, mhm.
which
Yeah.
may that's kind of how I really I connected with it first was someone who has a phobia of drowning who's never been near water or something like that where you're like, oh, maybe in your past life you drowned and you can go back and kind of relive the death scene or something like that and kind of take away some of the positive things and heal that from that life. Um, so those are interesting. And then, um, I mean, other things open up too. I don't know if we want to get into that now.
Why
I
not?
had,
Go ahead.
so I had a friend, he's a CPA of a large energy company, and he did a past life regression, which ended up being a future life progression.
Okay.
And so he goes and does it, and he comes back. It was not with me, but he said, apparently I am a Pleiadian, and I'm like, what is a Pleiadian? I had no idea. This was a couple of years ago. He's like, it's like some kind of alien, and I'm like, what? Like that's really weird. And I was very apologetic. I'm like, I don't, maybe this person is not a good therapist, and like, how does that happen? I don't like, how did we get to alien from past life regression?
Yes.
Um, and it was so I Googled Pleiadian, which is not the easiest word to just spell, right? So I'm
Right.
like fumbling around with the spelling, and it just so happened on that day. So reading like what a Palladian is, where they're from, the Pleiades, I had bought a Subaru car,
Mhm.
which the logo of the Subaru is like what, the Seven Sisters or something like that. It is the Pleiades. So my friend's telling me he's an alien in a past or future life, and I just bought a Subaru. So for me, this was like a big synchronicity because I'm like, this is crazy. um, oh, there's other beings that exist in the universe, right? So not only are there past lives, there's this whole universe of things where you can be earthbound or a human soul, and then also a star seed or a soul that came from outside of our particular planet. So then, I mean, that blew my mind. So that's another thing that comes up that people are not always prepared for.
Yeah, they're not just human.
No, I mean, like very interesting things. I mean, there's a lot of interesting, I would say, famous hypnotherapists that have done regressions with people that sometimes come out into books or movies, but that go into that kind of stuff. But yeah, we're not alone in the universe.
I think that's gonna be a topic for another conversation, talking about some
Yeah,
awesome galactic experiences.
for sure. But reincarnation, getting back to that, like we have a soul and your soul is eternal, and it gets to enjoy all these experiences. One way that I view it is just we're like actors in a play, right? And it's you're having fun and it's all very real, but that's what it is, right? Like you come in, you're in this, your soul experiences this lifetime, it's limited, and then you move on to the next thing, and it's all, you're always met with love. I think that's
Mhm.
important to know. One of the things that I'll do in my regression sometimes, if it allows, and that I was able to do in my regression, which was really important for me, is I went into the death state. So I saw my death, I saw my funeral, and then I went beyond that. So the time between life and death.
Mhm.
So some people are able to do that. And for me, it was, I saw everybody that I knew regardless of whether they were alive or dead, and they were all with me. And it was like just this overwhelmingly loving, positive thing. And so that was an interesting thing because I felt that. And when you feel that amount of love, it's very
Mhm.
powerful. So on the one hand, it was like, I observed my death in this particular life, but then I got to experience what happened right after, which was, I mean, kind of bliss, right? So you're with all the people that love you and that you love, and that it was very, very positive.
Yeah, I have to say, I did that too when I did my first past life regression. I went to the life between lives. is what I think. There's a book called that too. So I always call it the same thing, the life between lives. And
I think there's a couple of them, yeah.
yeah, yeah, there's some really good ones out there for anybody listening. Definitely research it. Um, but I had a lot of health issues, and I have a son on the autism spectrum who is no longer on the autism spectrum, but he used to be considered on the autism spectrum. And um, what was interesting at the time, my doctor told me that I wasn't healing mostly because I had so much trauma, and I really needed to heal the trauma. And so that's when I went to that counselor that he recommended, who had all these wonderful techniques like, NLP, EMDR, and regression. And the regression was extremely helpful for me. And then so was the NLP. But the regression helped me understand what this life was really, at least in part, about, like the things I was really struggling with and suffering from. And it opened me up to the deeper purpose of why we're here. So, I grew up in poverty, and there was a lot of abuse growing up and just a lot of struggle, a lot of difficulty. Everything was so much effort. And my past life was very similar. But in my past life, I turned to alcohol. And what's interesting is I have alcoholics in my experience in this lifetime that I've had to help and work around or be on the other side of that. And what's interesting is when I got all of that and then I passed in that lifetime, I saw the death and immediately saw the light of the soul that I knew as my mom in this lifetime, because it didn't look like her. It was like it didn't even have a face. It was just the presence of a light, but I knew it was her. And I got very aware that we came up with this next experience, and to write some of the karma and to get back on track with the lessons I was supposed to learn in that lifetime, the things I was supposed to clear, the karma and everything else. And it was a very fascinating experience. But one of the things that then was said to me, and I didn't see anything at the time, but I heard it very strongly, um, because I was blaming myself for my son's autism. I had a lot of like just shame around it, like somehow I caused it and that I had to fix it. I had to fix him. And what they said to me is the autism is not your fault. And you've had many lifetimes with your son, and you are very close in spirit. He's your greatest teacher, and he's here to teach you to be a better healer. So, in that moment, I knew that we've had lifetimes as healers, and we've been together in many lifetimes. And that he is actually, as far as a soul's evolution and understanding as a healer, he is ahead of me in that state. And so he came in as my child so that I could better understand how to help him, so that I could better understand how to be even, more of a I don't, a better healer, or someone who maybe understood more about the idea or the substance of healing and what does it take to actually heal, and the whole complexity of it all. But I just thought that it was so helpful. It was like this burden I was carrying, that somehow I caused it and now I need to fix it. And I used to always think, you know, I need to save my son. I need to save him. I need to rescue him. And it turns out he saved me. So that process rescued me and helped me get on track with my life.
Well, I mean, that's you're running the spectrum there of like the lower level, like carrying shame, and then the realization from a higher level that like your soul came into this lifetime in agreement to, on a very profound level, like deepen your soul work, and
Which is why it's
that's
so valuable to have that experience and to understand who you are as a soul. Like, what are you trying to learn? What is this lifetime really about? Why do I have that fear of heights, Jim? What's going on there? And spiders. Don't get me started on spiders. Like, what's going on with that? Like, there's got to be a past
well,
life connection.
I actually have overcome my fear of spiders. It took a while, but yeah. I wanted to mention too, there is she's a channeler. Her name is Georgia Jean, but I think she has a podcast. she to get out of her fight or flight mind, she got into skydiving.
Wow.
So I f- meant to say something when you shared your experience, but I was like, that is exactly what you should do, right? Like when you
Mhm.
are shifting from fear to love, like you push it, like you test yourself, you do things to really have faith in the universe, right? That, okay, like I'm going to do this to get out of that and to face my fears so that I live more freely and more lovingly.
Yes. Yeah, I've heard stories. I can't remember which book I read it in. It might have been the Flower of Life book by Janvala Melchizedek. I think it might have been in his book. But there was a story about going into the pyramids to face your fears, or maybe I heard him talking on an interview or something, but I don't remember where it came from. But one of the things that I remember hearing was that you would go in to a chamber knowing and it was completely dark and you'd have to spend the night in there and knowing that there's all kinds of creepy crawlies, there's snakes, there's spiders, scorpions, whatever. They're all coming in. They're all going to be in that room with you. And you have to sit in there and not be afraid. And knowing that if you are afraid, if you have that fear, it's almost like a magnet. It brings it to you. And but if you can just have that faith and that trust in God, source, universe, that everything's okay and you're fine and you're just whatever it is, it's fine. It's not going to hurt me. It's like you end up being fine. And it was one of the initiations of really coming in to that trust, that faith, and that presence of it's all is well, right? And so I think about that sometimes. And when I see a spider, I'm like, okay, I'm I have not conquered that yet, honestly. I've
My
gotten
my
better.
understanding my understanding of that experience in the pyramids is it's also psychological too, right? Like there is, and when I say that, um, perhaps like a more paranormal type thing too, like, but it draws out your fears that you have to face.
Yeah. And, I think this brings me to the whole ascension process, and as souls, I really do believe that we're working on a process and every lifetime helps us in our ascension. And facing your fear is a huge part of it. It's an initiation into that higher wisdom, that higher vibrational state of mind. You have to overcome the fear to get into that loving present state. And so much of our lifetimes seem to be built around how do we create more fear? So when I think about past lives and how that all interconnects, and you think about if you do know anything about your past lives, why you went through what you went through and how it's affecting you now in today's world, in this experience, this simulation, whatever it is, how can we then utilize that and transform it, transmute it into that opportunity of being a living state? My guides will often say that the greater the difficulty or challenge or catalyst, the further you can catapult forward in your ascension process. So, what I would encourage anybody who's listening to this right now is to look at the difficulties in your life and think about why, as a soul, you're going through them and why would you have helped plan it in a way to ascend? Because ultimately, that's the goal: is we're ascending. And how do we do that? And we usually do that through the challenges. So I would recommend seeing somebody like Jim to see, what is your past life and how, what does it mean and what are you working on as a soul and how can you utilize that wisdom and that understanding to move through your challenges. As fun as it is to experience past life regression, its value is in its meaning and what it can show you about you as a soul.
Yeah, how, themes of your life now, which you could even sort of meditate on, and say like, what are the challenges that I've been facing in this life? People that I know that have gone through probably some of the worst traumas are the ones that have made the biggest leaps in growth, and a lot of them, at least that I know, maybe just in the field that I'm in, are
Mhm.
healers,
Yep.
you know, so that concept of the wounded healer. But yeah, looking at it from a lens of, okay, This isn't my first rodeo.
Right? I know.
And if I don't have to worry about dying, how can I live life more fully? So that's what I would take away from the reincarnation concept is, okay, how can I take that, and face my fears knowing that I don't really have to worry about that and that I'm loved and I can live the life that I want to live. I don't have to be afraid of it.
I love that, and I think that's a great way to end. I don't know, that's the big message right there. Live the life that you love.
We'll end there, and then in the show notes, I think we're going to have links to the our websites, if you want to learn more information about us, our blog posts, our YouTube channels, and where you can find this podcast if you wish to learn more.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
We are so grateful that you joined us. Check out the description to learn more about us and also for additional resources to help you on your journey.